I'm 47 years old now, and when I look at my reflection in the bathroom mirror each morning, I see a man I don't entirely recognize. The face is mine, the lines, the grey at the temples, the way my shoulders have started to round forward slightly. All mine, but somewhere along the way, the person behind those eyes became a stranger. I spent the better part of 3 decades chasing something I thought would complete me. I made it my religion, my purpose, the measure of every decision. Money. And I got it, more than I ever imagined I would. But what I didn't realize, what nobody tells you when you're hungry and ambitious and 23 years old, is that every choice has a price. And some prices don't show up on any balance sheet. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knew your family's business and your last name carried weight, good or bad. My father worked at the manufacturing plant for 32 years. Same shift, same lunch break, same route home, every single day. He wasn't unhappy exactly, but I remember watching him on Sunday evenings, sitting in his recliner with the television on, and I could see this heaviness settle over him. Monday was coming, another week of the same. He'd look at the bills on the kitchen counter with this resigned expression, and my mother would touch his shoulder without saying anything. They loved each other, I know that. But there was this unspoken tension about money that hung over everything. The thermostat always set too low in winter, the conversations about whether we could afford new shoes before school started, the way my father's jaw would tighten when the car made a strange noise. I decided early on that I would never live like that. I told myself I'd work harder, push further, be smarter. I'd make enough money that I'd never have to worry, never have to feel that weight. It seemed so simple back then, so righteous even. I was going to win at life by winning at money. And for a long time, I thought I was doing exactly that. I met Sarah when I was 24, right after I'd landed my first real job at a financial services firm in Chicago. She was a teacher, second grade, and she had this way of looking at the world that was completely foreign to me. She noticed things I walked right past, the way light came through trees in the morning, the small kindnesses between strangers, the sound of kids laughing in a park. On our third date, we were walking along the lake, and she stopped to watch a father teaching his daughter to fly a kite. She stood there smiling for 5 full minutes, just watching. I remember thinking it was charming, but also slightly strange. I had emails to check, things to do, but she was completely present in that moment, and something about it pulled at me. We got married 2 years later. Small wedding, her choice. She would have been happy with something even simpler, but I insisted on at least making it nice. I was already making decent money by then, starting to climb. I wanted people to see that I was succeeding. She went along with it, smiling in that patient way she had, like she understood something about me that I didn't understand about myself yet. We bought a small house in a suburb I didn't particularly like, but it was what we could afford, and I told her it was temporary, just a stepping stone. Give me 5 years, I said, and we'll have something better. She said the house was perfect. She meant it. The firm I worked for was aggressive, competitive in a way that felt electric. I thrived there. 80-hour weeks didn't bother me. I liked the exhaustion, the sense that I was outworking everyone else. I liked watching my bank account grow, seeing the numbers go up. Every promotion felt like validation. Every bonus felt like proof that I was on the right path. Sarah would sometimes ask if I could come home earlier, maybe take a weekend off, but she never pushed hard. She'd just say it gently, and I'd promise I would soon. After this project, after this quarter, after I made senior partner, there was always an after. Our daughter Emma was born when I was 31. I was in a meeting when Sarah went into labor, and I almost didn't leave. I remember standing there, phone in my hand, looking at the conference room full of people, waiting for me to continue my presentation, and actually considering whether I could finish the meeting first. That thought, that split second of hesitation, it should have told me something, but I pushed it away. I went to the hospital. I was there for the birth. I held Emma, this impossibly small person, and felt something crack open inside my chest. I loved her immediately, completely, and I told myself that everything I was doing, all the hours and the stress and the sacrifice, it was for her, to give her a better life, to make sure she never wanted for anything. But what Emma wanted, I realize now, was time. She wanted me to be there when she woke up from her nap. She wanted me to read the same book 17 times in a row, because that's what toddlers do. She wanted me to sit on the floor and play with blocks, to push her on the swing, to be present for the 10,000 tiny moments that make up a childhood. And I wasn't there. Not really. Even when I was physically home, I was on my phone, checking markets, answering emails, my mind elsewhere. Sarah never said anything directly, but I could see it in her face, this quiet disappointment that she tried to hide because she knew I was working hard and she didn't want to seem ungrateful. The money kept coming. We moved to a bigger house when Emma was 3, then an even bigger one when she was 6. I drove nice cars, wore expensive suits, took clients to restaurants where a single meal cost more than my father made in a week. I felt successful. I felt like I'd made it. And whenever that small voice in the back of my mind whispered that something was wrong, I'd look at our house, our life, the security I'd built, and tell myself I was being ungrateful. I had everything I'd worked for. I should be happy. Emma started school, and suddenly she had plays and recitals and parent-teacher conferences. Sarah would put them on the calendar, and I'd say, yes, I'll be there, and then the day would come, and something would always come up. An urgent meeting, a client emergency, another reason that seemed justified in the moment. I missed Emma's first school play, her 5th birthday party. I showed up 2 hours late, and she was already in bed. Her soccer games, I'd make it to maybe 1 out of every 5. Each time, I'd feel a pang of guilt, and I'd promise myself I'd do better, and then I wouldn't, because there was always something more urgent, more important, or at least that's what I told myself. Sarah tried to talk to me about it, multiple times. I remember one night, Emma was maybe 8 years old, and Sarah sat down across from me while I was working on my laptop at the kitchen table. It was almost midnight. She was in her pajamas, and she just said very quietly, "I feel like I'm raising her alone." I looked up and I could see she'd been crying, though she was trying to hide it. And instead of really hearing her, instead of closing the laptop and talking to my wife who was clearly hurting, I got defensive. I talked about how hard I was working, how much I was providing, how unfair it was for her to make me feel guilty when I was doing everything for our family. She just nodded, said okay, and went to bed. We didn't talk about it again. I told myself we'd worked it out. But we hadn't worked out anything. We'd just stopped talking about it. The years blurred together. Emma got older. I got promoted again, made partner, then senior partner. My income reached levels I'd once thought were impossible. We took expensive vacations, though I usually spent half of them on my phone. We had everything money could buy. And slowly, so gradually, I barely noticed it happening. My family became strangers to me. Emma stopped asking me to come to things. She just assumed I wouldn't be there. When I did show up, she'd seem almost surprised and then uncomfortable, like she didn't quite know how to act around me. Sarah and I talked about logistics, schedules, bills, home repairs, but we stopped talking about anything real. We stopped laughing together. We stopped touching each other in that unconscious way that couples do. We were polite roommates managing a household. I told myself it was normal. Marriage evolves. Kids grow up and become independent. I was so good at justifying everything, so good at making excuses that sounded reasonable, and the money kept validating my choices. Every year I made more than the last. Every year our net worth grew. Look at what I'd accomplished. Look at what I'd built. How could any of it be wrong when the results were so clearly successful? Emma turned 14, and she became someone I didn't know. She was quiet around me, polite but distant. She had friends and interests and a whole life that I wasn't part of. I'd try to ask her about school, and she'd give me one-word answers. I'd try to joke with her, and she'd offer a thin smile and then make an excuse to leave the room. It hurt, but I told myself it was just teenage stuff. All kids pull away from their parents. It wasn't personal, except it was personal. She wasn't pulling away from Sarah, just from me. She'd talk to her mother for hours about things I never heard about. I was the outsider in my own home. Sarah went back to school when Emma was 15. She got her master's in education, started working on curriculum development. She seemed happier, more energized than she'd been in years. I was proud of her, and I told her so. But I also felt this strange resentment that I couldn't quite articulate. She was building something for herself, something that had nothing to do with me. We were living parallel lives under the same roof. I worked constantly. She had her career and her friends and her relationship with our daughter. We had sex maybe once every 2 months, perfunctory and emotionless. We hadn't had a real conversation in so long I couldn't remember the last one. I turned 43, and something started to shift inside me. I can't point to one specific moment. It was more like waking up slowly from a long dream. I'd be sitting in a meeting, listening to people talk about quarterly projections, and I'd think, why am I here? What is this for? I had more money than I could spend in a lifetime. We were set. Emma's college fund was overflowing. Our retirement accounts were maxed. I could stop tomorrow and we'd be fine. But I couldn't stop. The work had become who I was. Without it, I didn't know what I would be. One evening, I came home earlier than usual, around 8 instead of 11. Sarah was sitting on the couch reading, and Emma was in her room with the door closed, music playing softly. I stood in the doorway of the living room, and Sarah glanced up, surprised to see me. "You're home early," she said. Not happy, not upset, just stating a fact. I sat down in the chair across from her, and we were both quiet for a moment. Then I asked her something I don't know why I asked. I said, "Are you happy?" She looked at me for a long time. Then she closed her book and said, "I'm content, not happy." Content. And the way she said it, I knew she'd given up on happy years ago, at least when it came to us. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed next to Sarah, listening to her breathe, and I felt this crushing weight on my chest. I kept thinking about that word, content. It felt like failure in disguise. I got up and walked through our house, this big, beautiful house in a neighborhood full of big, beautiful houses, and it felt empty. All of it. The expensive furniture, the art on the walls, the kitchen that looked like it belonged in a magazine. None of it meant anything. I stood in the doorway of Emma's room and watched her sleep. Something I hadn't done in years, and I realized I'd missed her childhood. All of it. I'd been there technically, living in the same house, but I'd missed it. Those years were gone. I couldn't get them back. The next morning, I tried to talk to Emma before school. I asked her if she wanted to get breakfast together, just the two of us. She looked confused, glanced at Sarah as if checking whether this was some kind of trap, and then said she had to leave or she'd be late. She wasn't being cruel, she just didn't see the point. Why would she want to have breakfast with someone who'd barely been present for the last 14 years? I nodded and said, maybe another time, and she gave me that same thin smile and left. I started going to therapy. I didn't tell Sarah at first. I was afraid she'd see it as weakness, or worse, as too little too late. My therapist was a woman in her 60s who listened without judgment and asked questions that made me uncomfortable. She asked me what I was running from. She asked me what I thought money represented to me. She asked me if I'd ever stopped to consider whether the life I'd built was the life I actually wanted, or just the life I'd been told to want. I didn't have good answers. I'd spent so long not asking myself those questions that I didn't even know where to start. Over the next year, I tried to change. I started coming home earlier, turning off my phone during dinner, asking Emma about her day with genuine interest, instead of performative parenting. But it felt forced, awkward, like I was trying to play a role I didn't know how to play. Emma was polite, but guarded. Sarah was supportive but distant. They'd learned to live without me, and now I was this intrusive presence, trying to insert myself back into a family that had learned to function without me. I felt like a guest in my own home. Emma went to college last year. She chose a school on the opposite coast. When we dropped her off, she hugged Sarah for a long time, crying, telling her she'd miss her. Then she turned to me and gave me a quick, stiff hug and said, "Thanks for everything." Thanks. Like I was someone who'd provided a service. On the drive home, Sarah and I barely spoke. The silence between us was so heavy it felt hard to breathe. When we got back to the house, she went straight to their bedroom, our bedroom, and closed the door. I stood in the living room, alone in that big empty house, and I understood then what I'd done. I'd traded everything that mattered for something that didn't. Sarah asked for a separation 3 months ago. She said it calmly, kindly even, like she was trying not to hurt me. She said we'd grown apart, that she'd been unhappy for a long time, that she needed to figure out what she wanted for the rest of her life. She said it wasn't anyone's fault, but we both knew that wasn't true. It was my fault. I'd chosen this. Every day for 25 years I'd made a choice, and this was the result. She moved into an apartment downtown, something small and simple, and when I went to help her move, I saw that she looked lighter, freer. Leaving me had lifted a weight off her shoulders. I still work, but I've cut back. Not because I've figured out some grand truth about life, but because there's nothing else to do. Emma calls once a week, dutifully, the way you'd call an elderly relative you feel obligated to check on. Our conversations are surface level. She tells me about her classes, her friends, and I can hear in her voice that she's happy. She's building a life without me, the same way Sarah did, and I'm proud of her for that, truly. But it hurts in a way I didn't know was possible. I have money, more than I'll ever need. I have a big house that echoes with emptiness. I have a career that used to define me, and now just feels like an old habit. And I have decades of my life that I can't get back. I can't go back and read to Emma when she was 4. I can't go back and be present for Sarah when she needed me. I can't undo the 1,000 small choices that led me here. All I can do is sit with the consequences and try to understand how I got it so wrong. People ask me for advice sometimes, younger people at work who see my title and my salary and think I have it figured out. They want to know how to be successful, and I don't know what to tell them anymore. I used to have all the answers, work harder than everyone else, make sacrifices, stay focused. But now when they ask, I think about Emma's face when I missed her 8th birthday party. I think about Sarah sitting alone at school events, making excuses for why I wasn't there. I think about all the moments I traded for money, and I want to tell them that success doesn't look the way I thought it did. That you can win at something and still lose everything. I don't know what comes next for me. I'm trying to build something with Emma, some kind of relationship that isn't based on guilt and obligation. It's slow. She's cautious, and I don't blame her. Sarah and I are getting divorced. The papers are being drawn up now. She's being generous, far more generous than she needs to be, and I think that's because she doesn't need anything from me anymore. She already built a life without me. Now it's just making it official. Sometimes I drive past the old neighborhood where we lived when Emma was little, that first small house we bought. It's still there, painted a different color now, with different people living in it. I think about the version of myself who lived there, who was so sure he knew what mattered, who thought that if he just worked hard enough, made enough money, everything else would fall into place. And I wish I could go back and tell him something. I wish I could tell him that his daughter won't remember the size of her house, or the vacations, or the things he bought her. She'll remember whether he showed up. She'll remember whether he was there, and that his wife, that smart, patient, loving woman, she doesn't need a bigger house or expensive dinners. She needs a partner, someone who sees her, who's present with her, who chooses her every day, not just in words but in actions. But I can't go back. None of us can. We only move forward, carrying the weight of our choices. And my choice was money. I chose it over everything else, and I got it. I won that game. But the cost was my family, my marriage, my relationship with my daughter, and years of my life that I can't reclaim. That's not the kind of math they teach you in business school. It's not on any spreadsheet, but it's real, and it's permanent, and it's mine to live with. I'm 47 years old, and I'm alone. Not because I'm unlucky or because life dealt me a bad hand, but because I built this. Brick by brick, choice by choice, I built this empty life. And now all I can do is sit in it and understand what it cost me. Everything. It cost me everything.